Great. So today I'll be giving you a brief overview of how Git works. And this is going to be a very informal, hands-on walkthrough of a simple Git workflow. And I understand that some of you may already be familiar with how Git works, but my primary objective is to convert those of you that don't use Git to using Git. So Git is a version control system. It's very useful for tracking changes and for having a full history of all the changes you've pushed to your source code. And so this talk will be divided in roughly two parts. Phase 1, which should be pretty straightforward, and Phase 2, which is a little more difficult for the newly anointed. And hopefully we'll sort all this out by the end of the talk. And we're going to demonstrate Git by writing a small program. And so my dear friend and colleague here, Alain, thinks that the world does not have enough hello world programs. So we're going to write a program like that. So in this window, in this terminal, on the left we have my terminal, and on the right we have Alain's terminal. So let's start by creating a folder where we have our hello world program. Go right into it and create an application. I'll be using Python for this program. And let's just test out the program to see if it works. And yes, we see it works just fine. So next step at this point is to add it to the Git repository. So I'll just issue the git init command to turn this repository to a Git repository. And at this point, I'm going to want to add my application, tell Git where it is and that we need to track it, and do a commit. Let's call it initial commit. And here we have our first commit in the Git workflow. So if we issue git log, we can see that the commit actually happened. And there's a unique identifier, which is just a hash that tells you, uniquely identifies the commit. If I issue git status, I can see that there's nothing to commit and that the working directory is clean because I haven't changed anything since the last commit I just made. So now the next step is that I want to be able to collaborate with Alain on this project. So I'm going to create a repository on GitHub, which is basically just a host for your Git code. So basically, the commands I just issued, the first one, git remote add, just tells my local repository that there is another repository somewhere online on GitHub. And the second command, git push, just means that I'm going to push everything I have in my local Git repository to the online repository, which is github.com. And now let's just verify on GitHub, refresh the page, and see if the commit is properly pushed, so we can see that it is indeed on GitHub. And now I want to be able to collaborate on this project with Alain. So I'm just going to go into settings and give Alain write permissions, push permissions. And so at this point, he should be able to push to this repository. So for Alain to start working on this copy, he needs to copy or clone the source code from GitHub to have his own local Git repository, which includes the full history of everything I have done and everything that's on GitHub as well.
Okay, so Nick has been working on this sort of Hello World project, and he's letting me know about it, and I'm pretty excited to start collaborating on it. So he kind of sends me this Git link, and the first thing I do is I'm like, okay, Git, I already have this installed on my Mac. It comes with sort of the developer tools. And so I type clone, and then I give it this HTTPS thing that I can kind of figure out. It's a URL, and I can figure that out just by going to his website. So I clone that, and I get basically all the files for his project, but I also get sort of all the changes that he's been doing, and so I can see the history, of what he's been working on. But I'm pretty impulsive, so I'm just going to go into the directory and start, coding. So I'm going to look at Nick. Nick always writes pretty amazing code, but I'm generally more expressive than he is. So I feel like Hello World. I'll leave Hello World alone. But this definitely needs some French. So I'm going to say, salut, let's say, and then I'm going to put in some exclamation marks. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to write that, and I'm just going to leave my editor. And I just want to make sure I haven't introduced any bugs. Okay. I'm pretty happy about this. It looks good. So I'm going to commit my changes. So git commit is the command, and the file, and I'm going to leave a message. So I'm going to tell Nick and anybody else who's working on the project what I've done, and what I've done here is I've added some French. All right. Okay, so that's done, and so the project on my end, has his changes, it has my change, and sort of, it's its integral little repository there. But I also want those changes to go up to GitHub. So I'm going to send them to GitHub, so I get asked for some credentials. But yeah, all I'm doing is git push, and it sends it up there. So that's kind of the end of my collaboration for the moment.
All right, so we can see that Alain's commit has indeed been pushed onto GitHub. And the really important thing to notice at this point is that there are 3 Git repositories. One on GitHub, one on my local computer, and one on Alain's computer. And we basically have to exchange all these changes we put on the repository via pushes and pulls. And the push is just saying, take all my changes, send it to the server, or whatever Git repository you want to send it to. And the pull is the opposite operation. And GitHub, at this point, kind of serves as a sort of proxy, a way for me to bridge my changes and Alain's changes. So this marks the end of phase 1. So I'm going to pull changes from GitHub just to see if Alain worked on anything. And I can see that there has been a commit, at least one commit since the last time I checked. I'm just going to check out the code. And I see that there's salut la visite, French translation. That's a good idea. But I'm not okay with the expressiveness. So I'm just going to remove these exclamation marks. And I'm going to add it, tell Git that this file has been changed, and I'm going to issue a commit. And at this point, I've been working very hard on this program since 9 in the morning, and it's lunchtime, so I'm going to step out and just go ahead and have lunch without doing a push.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this Hello World project, and you know what this code needs. I feel like it needs more exclamation marks. So I'm going to add some, and I feel like I could have done sort of more. Advice skills. All right, and I feel like I could have done more for the French, so I'm going to add some there and just write that. And I'm pretty quick with my pushes and my commits. So let me, commit, and then let me push really quick. And I feel a lot better about this. I think Nick's going to appreciate this.
So I come back from lunch, and I'm thinking, oh, I just realized I didn't actually push my changes. So I try to push, and I get an error that states that, well, basically this error is caused by the fact that there was a commit that happened on the GitHub repository that I'm not aware of right now. So I need to essentially pull those changes before being able to do anything. So we pull what I did, and here I get another error stating that there's a merge conflict in the application. So I'm just going to go ahead and check it out. And I can see here between lines 3 and 6 where the state of my code was locally on my computer, and from lines 7 and 8 have all the changes that Alain pushed on GitHub. And I see this, and I realize that I'm really not okay with the expressiveness. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove all these lines and save it. And then push it. And at this point, I just resolved the commit. Probably not in the best way, but this is how you can resolve a merge conflict. So this is pretty much.
Just expose my ignorance about Git that I use, but well, I don't know. But so how do you know that Alain? It was from Alain. Those change. Do you have to go to see who did this particular commit, or there's a?
You can see it in the log. So here I have a log of all the commits. So I have my first commit, and then there's the second commit Alain made where he added some French and expressiveness. Then I remove these, and then he added some punctuation, and we can see the order is preserved because I did my commit even if I didn't push it on GitHub. It still happened before Alain's commit. And at this point, there's the merge resolution, and you can see here that there's two hashes. So this commit was actually based off this commit and this commit. It's not the most elegant way, but this is how the command line works. But there are probably, well, I know there are tools that exist where you can kind of see everything visually and how your commits came to be.
Try Git 3.
Sorry?
Just try Git 3 at the command line and
Git tree?
no space. No? Alright, never mind.
Probably don't have it installed. I know there's Git K for this, but that didn't work either, so.
And it's without the dash.
Yeah, we tried it without the dash.
Yeah.
Okay, definitely something to look into. That sounds interesting.
No, anyways, so this is it. Although we've only just really skimmed the surface of what you can do with Git, I hope to have successfully converted you to becoming Git users. And certainly the most important part about Git is that it allows you to collaborate without fear of losing information, unless you do what I did with merge resolution. And yeah, so hopefully you start using it if you're not using it already.
Another question, we are using SVN, which is doing the same thing on the next. So have you seen any advantage to use Git instead of SVN?
I have personally never used SVN, but if I remember correctly, I think SVN is not a distributed version control system.
And I think I can insert that now. I've used both for quite a while, and
Okay.
the main difference between Git and SVN is that on SVN, you don't have any local, you don't have a copy of the repository locally. So as soon as you try to do something else, then you, let's say comparing with the head, the program always have to hit the server. So if, for example, you're traveling for a while, and you want to make some changes to code, then on SVN you're pretty screwed up because since you cannot connect to the server, you basically cannot do anything. But with Git, you could still commit locally and do a whole bunch of changes. And once you have, again, access to an internet connection, then you can push everything, or at least synchronize everything.
Okay, because we are using your local copy of
Speak a little louder,
the program. We could do the change, and as soon as we have a connection, then we do our commit. If we have a conflict, SVN.
Yeah, but on SVN, the issue is that you cannot commit if you don't have access to internet. So you can change stuff,
Yeah,
but you cannot do, for example, 3 or 4 commits.
Okay,
But on
that's
Git,
right.
you can do as many commits as you like. And if
okay.
you make a mistake, you can always roll back to something
Roll back
else.
to the
But on
version.
SVN, it's impossible unless you have access to the server.
Okay.
So that's let's say a good advantage.
Thank you.
You have to speak really loud.
Okay. There are other features of Git that are really interesting. For example, branches. You can with Git you can create several versions of your code into separate versions and then decide whether or not you want to merge them. And you can also do checkout in the past. That's all. The hashtag that Nicolas showed, you can make a checkout to the hashtag and then you go back to the previous version. So you never really lose information. For example, if Alain wanted to go back to his previous version of the punctuation, he could do so.
Thank you. So any comments? I'm especially keen to hear. So it doesn't have to be questions. Any comments like that are great.
You didn't use SVN?
Have I used SVN? Yeah, I have used SVN. Yeah, and that's exactly right. What he's saying is that it's a single point of failure, and you have to communicate with the server. Whereas Git basically lets you store everything sort of. You can have like these repositories on each of our computers.
There's another point also. With the SVN, you need the person that had the server to give permission to someone to start working on the project and start making commits. In Git, when you do the clone, you can start working and you can do your commits without Nicolas never knowing about it. And at some point when you feel you have something good, then you can communicate and transfer
Yeah,
the
push it.
yeah, and then Nicolas could say, I don't care about whatever you did. And then you're left with two different servers that can build their own commit history and evolve their own software.
Yeah.
It's true that one thing with Git is that it's super easy to, let's say, hack a little bit your way around to upload, to copy, let's say, the repository to a new server. You basically have to change one file, and after that you do a push, and it will push everything on the new server. And from that you can start a completely new project based on the original source code.
And also, GitHub is not like, well, it's not Git, but GitHub provides a lot of very good tools for collaborative work. So it's very useful because you have GitHub pages if you want to host a project-specific page. You have an issue tracker built in. I know Bitbucket has SVN support and does similar things, but GitHub is really becoming the central platform for most open source projects. So it's also a good idea to use it because of GitHub.
Yeah, actually, in addition to Mark's point, as an academic user, you have 5 private repositories that you can use. So it's free. Pardon me?
It's not just academic. It's just student, right?
Just student, maybe?
Process.
Okay. Thank you. Good clarification, though, Valid.
Yeah, we saw your the GitHub with your document the project with the page and do you have the tree? Well, it could be a small tree with this. Maybe just show the one or two
I don't know.
feature.
I'm Googling it. I don't.
Yeah, you have the network there. So he needs to push the comments. He needs to push the merge validate. And
Okay.
then on GitHub page you have a network.
Okay, well maybe. Try.
Just go to the home and then on the right there got graphs and then there's network. It takes a while more.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the merge.
And if you mess up this graph, really screams at you.
So I don't know. Maybe it seems like there's a really good understanding of it, but we could do a part 2 if we wanted, if there was interest. But I
Yeah,
don't
do
know.
a merge after working on your own for 2 weeks on the
From
project.
project. Yeah. On the Hello World thing. Anything else you want to ask? Okay. Maybe we'll move to the next presentation.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, one very quick question.
Git doesn't allow for a lot of giant files. So what's an option there to host data in different versions?
Are you asking about binary files and huge files that you don't necessarily want to track in Git?
Yes.
Yes, so I don't think that there may be solutions out there, but personally, I just don't track those. I put them in the .git ignore file and just leave them on the server as is and make backups.
Because that doesn't allow for reproducible research, right? You need to also share the data with somebody else who's going to review your paper. So how do you manage this?
Yeah, I've seen that question before. I think you just have to put off.
So maybe I can comment on that. So it's said often that Git is not good with big files, but that's not so true. It's just that it deals with them very simply. If you make one bit modification in a big file, it will start the new file completely independently. As with SVN, it does a diff, and it only saves the differences. When you deal with binary files, SVN is not so good either. So if you can deal with keeping all the versions of your data file, then you're fine with Git. It works very nicely, but you will be keeping all the copies with all the modification of your big file. So you have to be careful about how you modify them, or maybe break them into small parts.
That might be an example of where SVN might be better because you don't want to have all those copies of the file locally. So in the case of SVN, you would get only 2 copies, your current copy and the head. So in that specific case, then SVN might be an option, at least to minimize the amount of data that's transferred between your computer and the server. But that's, let's say it's a little bit specific.
Yeah.
Okay, great.